Doctors with disabilities exist in small but measurable numbers. How did they navigate their journey? What were the challenges? What are the benefits to patients and to their peers? What can we learn from their experiences? My name is Lisa Meeks, and I'm thrilled to bring you the Docs with Disabilities podcast. Join me as I interview docs, nurses, psychologists, OTs, PTs, pharmacists, dentists, and the list goes on. I'll also be interviewing the researchers and policymakers that ensure medicine remains an equal opportunity profession.
Welcome back to the Docs with Disabilities podcast. Today, in this second half of our two-part series, Dr. Poullos and Dr. Jain continue their conversation about the journey to fully embracing a disability identity. Dr. Poullos discusses the defining moments in his career and how concepts like disability justice have informed his leadership style. He and Dr. Jain also discuss the importance of working with other groups and cross-movement building toward the unified goal of equity.
So tell me, because I know even since you started, you had this critical awakening that led you to taking up this leadership role. You were, it sounds like the students really fed you a lot of information and to help you on that journey, which I think is super cool that the students were managing up.
They still are. They still
As
are.
they do. And I guess I'm interested as well, like, how has your thinking even evolved further since you took up this leadership role? I know that you've continued to kind of, as we all do, kind of question and develop new insights. So I'm curious kind of where you've gone since then with your thinking around disability.
Love how you have like labels for all these things that I could just explain in paragraphs, and you can name them with critical awakening or political disclosure. I can only explain them in paragraphs, and you have like 2-word labels for them. It's fantastic.
This is the qualitative researcher in me.
Yeah, it is. So, this is a good question. How has my thinking further evolved?
I guess I'm wondering, are there concepts or ideas that you're working with or that have kind of excited you and have informed your work that you're working with or thinking about or activated by?
Yes. Disability justice, I think, is the thing that I've been thinking about most recently. Like that I read the Sins Invalid book, Skin, Tooth, and Bone.
Yep.
And they talk about the 10 principles of disability justice.
Yep.
I think like living and leading by those principles is my goal. And I think it's actually served me and serves Maddie quite well. I mean, Alice Wong and I had a whole conversation about this at our last conference about disability justice in medicine. And I learned so much talking to her. I mean, just the ideas of like intersectionality and cross movement organizing, cross disability organizing, leadership of the most impacted, these sorts of of principles I think are really helpful. And just lately been thinking about, we're an employee resource group at Stanford. That's like one of the hats we wear at SMATI, is being an ERG for the Stanford healthcare enterprise.
Okay.
And so our role in that regard is to serve basically as an affinity group to, be building community efforts and outreach and advocacy, accessibility, all of the things that are important to people with disabilities. And another part of our function is as a subcommittee of the diversity cabinet. As leader of SMATI, I've been named one of the faculty directors in the Office of Faculty Development and Diversity. And so that's all like School of Medicine infrastructure. And so lately I've been meeting with other leaders of the other ERGs, so like the Black and the Latino, the LGBTQ, the working parents, of other ERGs, and we've been talking about our common struggles and our common needs and wishes. And it was funny. Yesterday, I was meeting with Dr. Faciotto, Magli Faciotto. She's like one of the deans in charge of the OFDD. And I was telling her about some of our needs, and I was thinking, she was asking me if what I thought about this idea of coaching, but not individual coaching, but group coaching sessions. I said, just think disability is kind of unique in its needs, and I like these meetings with the other leaders, but maybe with the coaching, it should be more individual. And she said, well, let me show you something. And it was a summary of their last meeting and all of the issues that came up. And it was like how to get more people involved, how to improve volunteerism, to maximize impact, to prevent burnout, to increase engagement. I was like, okay, yes. Well, this is like exactly the stuff that we're struggling with as an organization. So, we just have so much in common, these other groups. And really, like, it's essential that we work together in solidarity to advance our goals. And so I'm really a big proponent of cross movement solidarity. It's not always easy.
In academia, the disability justice framework, founded by Black and Brown artists and activists, calls attention to the ways that ableism is linked to multiple other systems of oppression. In recent years, this framework has evolved to the current 10 core principles. In this segment, Dr. Poullos describes some of the ways that he strives to enact those principles as a leader, while Dr. Jain provides further context and insight on the roots of ableism as a disability studies scholar.
I don't know how much I don't know that everybody thinks that disability should be a part of the diversity conversation. I mean, I kind of get that sense. It's never been like said to me, and certainly like the people in positions of power in the organization have never said that either. But sometimes I get that feeling.
Are there ways that that comes up? Like, have you,
Mm,
or is it more of a vibe?
more of a vibe.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting. I mean, I love to hear the ways that you're really enacting kind of some of those disability justice principles. And I think you're right that cross-movement solidarity is important for a number of reasons, not the least of which because there's probably disabled folks who cross over many of those groups. But this question of I guess this feeling about does disability belong in the diversity conversation has a lot to do with how people tend to understand and know disability, right? In the sense that people know it as an individual problem, people know it as a
Mm.
medical problem, rather than disability as, an interaction between bodies and environments, a relational experience, a social experience that is
Hmm.
tied up in oppression, that is also, ableism is a key tool of racism, of colonialism, of sexism. So I guess I hope, one of the ways that cross movement organizing can be helpful is, or building that cross movement solidarity is that through that work, you can demonstrate that way of knowing disability to politicize other people's understandings of disability. So in that way, it's important that you're at that table because you can facilitate that shift in people's understanding of why you should be there, why disability should be at that table.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a key point that I try to make in my outreach presentation about the interaction between ableism and other isms. It can be quite shocking if I take it to like a real life example to say of like what exactly people have said out loud to justify sexist and racist policies and laws. Like you don't really want to even, it's almost taboo to say it. The arguments that have been made to keep people down, it can be shocking. So like I find like for me, the practical inaction of these things is for me like more easily grasped than the philosophical.
Mm,
And so what we've done on a practical level is just planned joint events. So we've had events with the Lane Library called intersectional media discussion groups. And so, for example, we had one about the intersection of queerness and disability, and we had another one about the intersection of Blackness and disability.
mm,
And so we've invited people who inhabit those
mm,
intersections to come and discuss with us what
yeah.
it means to be queer and disabled in medicine or Black and disabled in medicine. And so I feel like just talking about those intersections and learning about those sort of unique lived experiences and the nuances of what it really means to exist in those spaces for me is just really helpful. So it's like it's very practical, and through planning those events we get to know the other leaders, we get to work with them and build those personal relationships that are so critical
Yeah.
to doing the work. I mean, I think that that's one of the most important things in this space is the relationships that you build with other leaders in the community, and one of the most gratifying aspects of the job, because the people who are working in the disability and the diversity spaces are some of like the coolest people
Mm,
I know, the most open-minded and progressive and accepting, and who just get it,
yeah.
who just get life and they get struggle. It's just a natural fit, and we're all struggling against the same things.
You were talking about, the practical application and the connections and the people that you've met through the work from other movements. Yeah, I mean, I think, I think about, you said the beginning of the title of the SINS Invalid book, Skin, Tooth, and Bone. And the second part of the title is the basis of our movement is people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it. It's the relationships. It's the love of people that creates
Mm-hmm.
the movement, that fuels the movement.
The struggle that I have with it is like the leadership of those most impacted and the centering of like Black and queer and Indigenous people. And I think, our board of directors is pretty diverse,
Mm.
but I'm not very diverse. I'm sort of like the stereotypical leader of disability movements, like the white guy with the mobility difficulty.
Mm.
And so, but at least I recognize it and I realize that, we need to improve in this regard. We
Mm.
need to support like staff and residents and students and the people who are the least impacted. And we do have dialogue with those people. And so I feel like their voices are heard. And, to some extent, as you said, I get managed from those behind. And so, in a way, there is a leadership of those most impacted.
Mm.
It may not be entirely visible, but it's a definite reality
Mm.
of the work we do, that we do it in service of and also in response
Mm.
to.
Driven by,
They're
almost. Yeah.
driven by their needs.
Mm.
And so, and the palatability thing is another interesting topic. So, Terry Adams, who just retired as the director of the OAE here at Stanford, she jokes that I'm palatable Pete and she's terrible Terry. And the two of us make a good combination when we're meeting with people because I'm so agreeable and jolly, although less so as time goes on. And as I get more and more PO'd about like the lack of movement and
Mm.
how the needle seems to be stuck.
Mm.
But, at the time, Terry, she has a way with words, the mouth of a sailor, and just like no fear. And it's so refreshing.
Mm.
And so I think we make a good duo.
Representation and leadership is an undisputed catalyst for disability equity. Yet, it can be difficult to balance empowering versus burdening members of the disability community. Here, Dr. Jain and Poullos discuss possible solutions for working towards sustainable change while mitigating the burden placed on individuals with disabilities.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that idea of leadership of the most impacted. And the other piece that I think about with that is, are we asking those folks or requiring those folks who are most impacted to once again lead a movement, take the time, be out front and most, in a vulnerable position of leadership, as much as it is a powerful position. And so, yeah, it's something that I think about as well, is that must those people always literally be at the front of it rather
Mm.
than what you're describing, which is being led by those folks? I think it's a complicated space to think about, is how do we achieve that in a way that doesn't further burden it. It's something to keep being unsettled by, I think.
Well, I even asked my board of directors, like, should I continue to be the co-chair of this movement, or do we need somebody else out front? Straight up asked them, and they said that they had faith in my leadership and that I should absolutely continue in the role, and that, we were taking steps towards disability justice, and that it's not an endpoint necessarily, it's a journey.
Yeah.
And at least we're keeping these things in mind.
Yeah. And activating them,
Uh,
not just keeping them in mind, but activating them, right? You've described the ways that you are activating and actively wrestling with those questions, which I think is incredibly important. Yeah, and it may be that there's a time where you say, here's, the person who can take this forward, and it's time for me to step away or to step aside, maybe co-lead or a different way of leading. There's all kinds of ways of leading a movement.
well, right now we're putting the final touches on a request for funding, actually, for SMATI to be. Well, we're thinking it would be great to be a center, but there might be a financial requirement that you have like a certain amount of money. I'm waiting to hear back on that, but to fund the program. And and as part of that, we're asking for funds to hire an executive director, somebody whose full-time job it is to move things forward. Because like with just Ken Sutha and me as co-chairs, and the rest of our board of directors having full-time jobs and just doing this as basically volunteer work.
Yeah.
Although I do get some time off the schedule, not enough time, but some time to devote to the work. That having somebody full-time to write grants, to build bridges with our community, to push the research forward, to just run the day-to-day and do all of the things that is on our wish list and bring those to reality. And I think if we had that, there's so much greater impact that we could have. It's not going to be cheap. We're asking for like a few $1 million to do this. And we're saying, and we have data from Stanford Medicine to back up the need for this. People with disabilities have less trust in the institution to do what's right. They feel less connected to the mission, vision, and values. They experience less respect compared to people without disabilities. So many people who need accommodations aren't asking for them or receiving them. And it has like a host of downstream effects also. And so the data was key. And so our argument is that, A, this is unjust, and B, it's completely exposing us to liability as an institution, not even following the law. We talk about the compliance based approach. What's the middle one? The top is the transformative approach.
Spirit of the
Spirit
law.
of the law.
Yeah.
Spirit of the law. I mean, sometimes we're not even at the compliance based level. We're at the just please get a job somewhere else level in some cases.
Yep.
In some cases, like I said, it's very random. And some people get what they need and others don't.
Yeah. And I think that inconsistency is something that we're seeing nationally, something I've seen within institutions as you're describing. We can do better. I think we have to do better. So it's super exciting to hear that that's kind of the route that you're going, is to get that hopefully sustainable funding and institutional buy-in to get the dedicated attention that you need, because I think you're right. Like, there's a kind of a ceiling to what's possible through semi-volunteer, insufficiently compensated time approach to the work. I think you've accomplished quite a lot. You've been doing quite a lot through that model, but to get to that next level, that kind of real structured attention, paid labor is fundamental to getting to the next level, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing is that Stanford just hired a CDIO, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, whose job it is, Dr. Joyce Saki, whose job it will be to oversee those initiatives across the enterprise, the School of Medicine and the two hospitals. And I met with her. I interviewed her before, during her hiring process, and she has quite a bit of passion about disability and disability rights.
Great.
And so I hope that I think that she'll be a really good partner. I would really like for there to be a chief accessibility officer or some equivalent post,
Yeah.
very high up in the organization, perhaps under the CDIO, perhaps in HR, or a to be determined location in the hierarchy, but hopefully hold high up, whose job it is not to enforce compliance, but to conduct a transformational overhaul of the system. I think that's the other step. I don't know if that's someone in the C-suite, like I was talking about, or maybe a dean.
Yeah, it's a lot of cats to herd. Often it takes that leadership from the top to say, this is how we're doing things now. This is the kind of bar that we are meeting or exceeding. And that means no more of this XYZ.
Yeah, no more repetitive requests for
Oh gosh.
documentation, no more delays, no more inadequate accommodations, no more dragging things out for months and months.
Yep. Yeah.
Just no more of it.
Yeah. And often that takes money and somebody saying, here's the line that we meet, Unfortunately, I hate a stick approach, but often the stick is necessary to get things done, to shift a way of working, to say, this is no longer acceptable. This is how we work. And often, sometimes that comes with, it needs to come with financial support, like knowing that the money is there so we don't have to operate within scarcity. It requires, different fundamental principles of working.
Yeah, we should be looking at disabled trainees and employees as customers, and that the customer experience and the ability to serve these clients in an effective way is how they are judged. The stick approach, sure, is one thing, but what about just rewarding people for disability inclusion and judging them on the level of inclusion and the satisfaction of their disabled customers with the service they're receiving?
I think it would certainly be it would bring a different spirit to the work, right? Because currently it's framed as kind of a, skepticism, which brings with it the idea that people are trying to get something over on the system, that they're a risk or a danger to the system, rather than, here are valued employees, trainees. How can we ensure that they're thriving in their role? How can we enable them to do the best work that they can do? Our job is to make you work as best as you can. How can we do that for you? How can we ensure that you are minimally impacted by the systems that you're required to interact with? Like that shift, maybe it's the consumer approach, maybe it's a shift in how things would work. If that was the stance, that would really change people's experiences and would help the institution, right? If if we're thinking
Mhm.
about the goals of the institution, and I hate to take, you know, money as the kind of outcome, but how much more productive could people be if they're not wasting their time? And also if they just have what they need.
As we conclude this episode, Dr. Jain invites Dr. Poullos to discuss his source of joy in his many roles. Listen or read along as Dr. Poullos shares a heartwarming note from a mentee that speaks to his why.
I guess the last question that I want to ask you is, we talked about earlier where you started, before your injury and even through the injury and how that shifted for you. I guess I'm curious what joy you find in disability now in your life.
What joy do I find in disability in my life, huh? It's what's not to be joyful about. I'm trying to practice more gratitude.
Mm,
It's coming up on 20 years for me.
wow.
January 5th. January 5th, 2003 was my spinal cord injury.
Mm,
I mean, everything changed in my life at that point. Practically the entirety of my days have been spent. I'm never without the disability at the front of my mind. Even when I'm doing something that doesn't involve my disability, the disability impacts it
mm,
in some way. The struggle that I'm having to get my fork to my mouth, the stiff hands I'm having to break open on a hard surface, the pain and discomfort. And so, I mean, it's hard to be joyful about it. But I have to have so much gratitude for what I've accomplished, and most grateful for like the people around me and all of the amazing people that I work with and have gotten to know through this movement. I say like the people are the joy that I find in disability. I don't find much joy in like the physical state of my body for sure. I have pride I can walk around with my crutch and be a doctor and practice medicine, and people can see me and see the possibilities of how things could be
mm,
or should be for those with disabilities. So that's one form of like pride, that I'm just here, and I know that my being here means something to people.
mm.
Like the students have told me like it means so much that their faculty mentor is a disabled person,
Yeah.
and they love seeing somebody with a physical disability in a position of leadership,
Mm,
and that makes me feel good. It makes me feel good about my mentorship program, makes me feel good hearing from people that they would have dropped out of medicine if it hadn't been for our mentorship program, that people's ideas of what it means to be disabled and how they view disability has changed through our programming, and that it's been like life altering. I got an email the other day from a, a physician who lost his eyesight and is having to retrain in another field. And just like can I read it?
yeah. If
Can I read you a
Yeah,
little part
please.
of this email? Yeah, he says that he matched in his specialty of choice. And he says, I really don't think I could have done this without the mutual mentorship program. it's been so helpful to me over the last year. So many things I learned from the practical and educational parts of the program were helpful in writing my personal statement, talking to letter writers, and especially during my interviews. And the people I met have been an invaluable resource. I think I've really benefited from how the program has helped me form and understand my identity as a disabled person in and with a community of other disabled people. He says, especially at first, it was easy for me to see how my disability was different from others, and the program has really changed me to see the commonalities. And I got so emotional reading this. We work hard on this program, and just like I sent this to my team, and I think it just made everybody's day,
Mm,
to make that kind of impact on even just like one person
mm,
is just so gratifying. And that sort of like giving back to the communities fills me with joy. And I'm so grateful that I'm in a position to do that. And yeah, I love my colleagues in disability. They're my new family, and like I just love them.
mm. That email reminds me a lot of what you described as your journey, right? And I think
Mm.
what's really beautiful and important about the work that you're doing, in particular that mentorship program, is it's doing that work in community that you happened upon, right? You're creating that space for that, critical consciousness development, for relationships to develop, to enable people to see and access their power as disabled people, not as people with disabilities, but as disabled people, right? That takes a different place. I think, you know, people can choose the language
Mm.
that works best for them and they feel most comfortable with, but I think that what is being described in the work that you're doing is recognizing exactly what you said, that disability is at the forefront of your life. It's there all the time. And the I think, at least what I perceive, and you can tell me I'm wrong, but that you've been on a journey, and you're taking other people on a journey with you, walking
Mm.
or moving, thinking, working alongside them, rolling alongside them in a way that reshapes how you think and feel with disability, finding power in that, which is, I mean, what more could we want?
I believe you just took the conversation full circle, Dr. Jain. Yep. Perfect.
Well, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to have this conversation with me.
Neera, I could talk to you for days. I love talking with you. I learn so much every time I talk to you.
I learned so much from you too. I think it's in that kind of relationship as you described that we move our ideas forward, and I always feel that talking to you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our guests, Dr. Peter Poullos and Dr. Neera Jain, for sharing your wisdom and experience with us. We are so grateful for your unique insight as faculty and leaders in the disability community. To our audience, thank you for joining us for this episode. We hope you'll subscribe to our podcast and tune in next time. This podcast is a production of the Docs with Disabilities initiative and is supported in part by the University of Michigan Medical School Department of Family Medicine Disability Initiative, the Stanford Medicine Alliance for Disability Inclusion and Equity, and the Ford Foundation. The opinions on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the hosts, their respective institutions, or the funders. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivative license. This episode was produced by Lisa Meeks, Kadisha Trigo, and Jacob Feeman.